Tomasini. I guess we're ready, Greg. Here we go.
Okay.
Welcome once again to the special series of interviews with Greg Peterson, one of the founders of the Robert H. Jackson Center in Jamestown. In addition to his work at the center, where we record this interview today, Greg is a partner in the Phillips Lytle Law Firm, working in the Jamestown office. I'm Dennis Webster from radio station WJTN. Greg, I'm happy to be back with you.
Delighted, and happy St. Patrick's Day for those years from now who want to wearing a little green here.
As I am as well. If you just have stumbled into this interview series, you are jumping in closer to the end than to the beginning. This is our 5th interview, so if you want to learn more about how the Jackson Center came to be and some of the things that brought attention to the center as it was being launched, you need to look back at some of our earlier conversations. If you want to know about some of the unusual and compelling things that have happened here in recent years, and about some of the other aspects of Greg Peterson's contribution to the community, you are in exactly the right place. Greg, I want to take you out of Jamestown for a moment and go to Buffalo, because there is a Robert H. Jackson courthouse in Buffalo, New York. And I wanted to have you tell, from your own perspective, how that came to be and what involvement you and the center had in making that occur.
It was a grand announcement that there would be a new courthouse in Buffalo many years ago, maybe 10 years ago, and bids went out, and there was a lot of hubbub about that, and ultimately the construction that would occur with all this big glass, which would have emblazoned on the glass the Constitution of the United States. It was an award-winning process. And as it went along, there was a lot of controversy regarding asbestos, regarding contractors, et cetera, but nevertheless, it was in the news a lot. And at one point, way off our radar screen at the Jackson Center, there was an editorial in the Buffalo News bemoaning the delay, bemoaning the cost, but nevertheless recognizing it will be a eye-catching building. And at the bottom of it saying they don't even have it named yet, was the last paragraph. And so a partner in my firm cut that editorial out, circled it, and said, get on it. So I got not only that from one of my partners, but about 12 of them sent me inter-office mails to that extent. Greg, here's your chance. Never gave it a thought. So then I called Brian Higgins, then our congressman, and I'd met him. He had come down here a couple of times. He had an interest in Jackson, especially in international law. So I called him. I said, is it too late to be part of this? And then he explained the process of the naming of a federal building, and that required it's come initially from the congressman from the district where the building is situate, supported by all the state members of Congress, including the 2 senators, and that's how it kind of works its way. And I said, where are you? And he goes, well, there's been names bandied about, none of which were Jackson's. And he goes, that is probably a good idea, and you should consider writing me a letter, which I did. And the compelling part was it's a federal courthouse. And this is Justice Robert H. Jackson, the only Supreme Court justice from Western New York, who practiced in Western New York, which that commenced a 6-year process of doing an awful lot of lobbying, sending the Gail Jarrow book out to every congressional delegate.
That's the biography of Jackson, most recent.
Correct, thank you. So the Gail Jarrow Jackson biography went out to all of them with a letter supporting the idea. My partners in Buffalo introduced me to the judges, who are not political, but nevertheless to kind of plant a seed, introduced me to some political people on both sides of the aisle, Democrats and Republicans. All of which now built, all of a sudden there was an editorial or two, all of a sudden the idea of maybe Jackson should be equally thought of in the lines of the names that we're considering: Matt Urban, who was the most decorated World War II veteran, period, from Western New York, and Wild Bill Donovan. Mm-hmm. In fact, it was the Donovan people thought they had this pretty well nailed. You know, editorial, and we became public, and we would go to we got the UB deans and we had a whole program around why Jackson should be that. I mean, we really all stops out. And then one day, I'll never forget this. I get a call from former Lieutenant Governor, Congressman Stan Lundeen, who's a board chair at the time of the Jackson Center, in the phone, and I still have it. The audio is screaming in my phone. He did it! He did it! Congressman Higgins went on the floor and he did it! You know, he had literally been on the floor of the House recommending the name of Robert Jackson. Started the process. Mm-hmm. We didn't know that was coming. Well, that started a whole lot of going on back and forth because now he needed the approval of all the congressional delegates, which he got them to sign the Congress, or the House of Representatives. The holdouts were the two senators. Now, Raleigh Kidder used to be a roommate of Senator Schumer, so he's all over him. Lundeen's calling Schumer. Every time Schumer came here, which was a lot, I'm there front and center with Stan and Raleigh. We appreciate your willingness to consider this. You know, all that kind of arm.
Greasing the wheel.
He never committed. He never committed. So finally, this is beautiful. The courthouse was going to be dedicated, not the naming. The courthouse was going to be dedicated. Again, no name yet. So the chief judge of the federal court, William Scrutiny, who was a fan, but he couldn't do it publicly. He's a court judge. But he let everybody who otherwise knew and internally Jackson should be the guy. So how do we get Schumer to, we need him. So he invites Schumer to the dedication of the courthouse. Now everybody's there. And no disrespect, Senator Schumer loves a camera. So all of a sudden, everybody on the dais speaking, Mayor Brown, Congressman Higgins, you name it, and the court, chief of the court system comes, and they're all talking about what a great building. It would be an honor to have Jackson's name against it. We hope it moves through Congress. That's the message. Everybody does it. Who's the last speaker? Senator Schumer. Senator Schumer. So now I'm there, Raleigh's there, Stan is there in the audience. We're, big as life. And Schumer gets up and he goes, finally, after he says, I have always supported the name of Robert Jackson in the federal court. And that's the first time anybody had heard this. And he took full credit for it. And I've been lobbying ever since this, and this. And you could just see it. I'm looking at Higgins and Byron Brown and Judge Scrutiny, like, whoa. So that was the day Schumer threw his support there, and then immediately got done, went right to the bank of cameras that were now all over the courthouse, telling everybody that he was the guy.
Yeah.
And so that's how the politics behind the scene of what I believe, frankly, is probably going to be the longest lasting legacy of the Jackson Center will be our role in getting the name on Robert Jackson on the federal courthouse.
I was surprised to learn around that same time when all this came out that Jackson actually did have an office in Buffalo for a time.
He practiced law for a firm headed by Charles Penny, and they did a lot of railroad work, trolleys and stuff like that.
And that was sometime in the period when he was mostly in Jamestown?
Well, he moved up there, the Ellicott Building was where his office was for 2 years. So he practiced law in Buffalo and then was enticed to come back to Jamestown.
Talking about Jackson moving for a moment, if we could sort of slide to another subject here to make the best use of our time, Greg. One of the things, and those who are viewing this out of order don't know perhaps the story of how the establishment of the Robert H. Jackson statue at Jackson Square near Love School in Jamestown actually was one of the kindling moments for you to begin to think about Jackson and imagine the center as it has turned out to be. That statue is not near Love School anymore. It's here at the Jackson Center. So You want to give us a little insight as to how Jackson moved in that instance?
Yeah, again, 1996, the statue was dedicated. Justice O'Connor, I was there, and it's discussed in great detail in a prior interview. It became, and it was determined that that location would be most beneficial really through, at the time, John Hamilton of the Gebbe Foundation, and the Gebbe Foundation and other foundations supported Jackson statue, Jackson Square is what it was called, as that would be an entree to downtown Jamestown. You come down North Main, and you kind of hit that 5 points, and you go up a hill.
Who is this man? Yeah, why is there a statue here?
Exactly. So it's visual, but as time went on, not everybody could read the sign, or everybody understood Jackson's role in Jamestown, or certainly there was no role of Jackson at Love School. Fast forward, I met with Tim Maines, who was then the Jamestown High School superintendent, and asked him, would he be against me and the Jackson Center petitioning the concept of moving the statue to where it would be in front of the Jackson Center. Again, people asked all the time, how come that statue is not at the center? Quick answer is we didn't exist. It didn't exist at 1996. So there was no alternative. However, due to budgetary concerns and making sure the statue was well preserved and other plans the school had, they had no objections if, in fact, we paid for it and moved it. And again, I got to thank the County of Chautauqua, George Spano specifically, County Executive Vince Horrigan, Rod Drake, who was the kind of coordinator, how to uninstall this huge statue and its big marble base, from there. It required
It's not two guys in a big truck.
No, man, it was two huge cranes that happened to be made available to us at both ends. Here, put on a truck, and then it was brought up here and put in front of the Jackson Center. Another crane happened to be here, not happened. It was here, and we placed it, and subsequently had great deal of rah-rah from a whole lot of internationals to dedicate the statue. So, and Dexter Benedict, by the way, Dexter Benedict is the sculptor of it. He came here to shine it up, and at the same time present to us various bronze busts that were made from that statue. That busts are here. They're at the Supreme Court. They're at the federal courthouse, and they're at the Truman Library. So it's that particular bust recreated from the statue by Dexter Benedict has found great travel.
Well, it's become the quintessential picture, if you will, of Robert H. Jackson in terms of what he looked like, aside from a few that are on the wall here that are very, very similar to his rendition of Jackson's face. That is what Robert H. Jackson looked like for most of us.
So it was, now it's where it may have been if we existed back in 1996. But the Jamestown School Board deserves all the credit in the world. They saw the value of it. They had no hesitation or reservation. And now it's as if it's been here forever.
If there hadn't been a statue, there wouldn't have been a center, and we'll just leave it for people to go back and look at that. Some of the things that have happened here at the Robert H. Jackson Center in the meantime that are not really center-related directly, but have tangential connections to what happens here in the legal world. This has become sort of a center for CLE, continuing legal education. Is that the way you put it?
Yeah, one of the things, of course, is Jackson being a lawyer. And we knew that our support of the Jamestown Bar Association and the New York State Bar Association and the Supreme Court Historical Society was important to advance the legacy. So very early on, in conjunction with the Chautauqua Region Community Foundation and Randy Sweeney specifically, we started to have fairly modest legal education programs where we'd bring somebody from the outside who would speak about trust, estates, real estate. And we'd use the Kappa Theater. That then over time morphed into more of a public education, which had a continuing legal education component, which now the place is packed when we had this. And there were 4-hour extravaganzas with a big lunch after that. And normally the way they worked is we'd have 4 hours, and it became law. There was law related. It could have been, is the mafia still dead? You'd say, well, that's pretty public, pretty interesting, pretty packed, but there's law in there somewhere. Or we talked about Muhammad Ali and boxing, and we had people who were boxers or scholars or authors talking about Ali. Well, again, the place is packed, the public is interested, but yeah, there's law. Of course there is. You got to have a license to box, something like that. And then we'd always conclude after 4 hours of that CLE, a luncheon downstairs, of which we usually brought in a sports personality, mimicking on a very singular basis the Temple Hazard Abraham type approach where we interview them. And so it was a 5-hour spectacle, and we did that twice a year, and we did it for 15 years. Only pause during the pandemic. And Ed Tomasini has, again, he covered all of those. They became YouTube moments. But I just got to call out one in particular, which was beyond the pale. It was called Woodstock, the Music of the First Amendment. Woodstock, the Music of the First Amendment.
I must ask, did you create the title?
Yeah.
I figured.
And so I thought, this is great. How are we going to pull this off? So I got a hold of Max Yasgur. Now, Max Yasgur is the farm where Woodstock was held. His son, Sam, is an attorney in Sullivan County. And he was at age 27 at Woodstock helping his dad, and he met all of the players, the Jimi Hendrix and the Crosby, Stills, Nash, all that stuff. So he came here, but more importantly, he pulled together a 2-hour tying in the most amazing, and for the first time, he'd never done this before, music, where he'd have Joe Cocker, Crosby, Stills, and then talk about the First Amendment, finding Robert Jackson. And this place is packed, and you could hear a pin drop. And before that, we had crazy things like the guy who was the evaluator of the Richard Nixon tapes. He was here. And the Coup Resource Center, at the time, was making shirts. And we convinced them to make tie-dye shirts. And
For Woodstock.
For Woodstock. So it was a Woodstock peace symbol, and it said Woodstock, Music of the First Amendment, and on the back it talked about the Resource Center and the Jackson Center. And everybody, to get CLE credits, were told by me that you had to wear it. You must wear it or you get no credits. So the place is now 200 strong of CLE, or of the Resource Center shirts, and there's a great picture of that. Now, the postscript to the whole thing, we had to have a speaker. Normally we have sports guys. Well, in this case, I was able to prevail upon Corey Wells, the lead singer of Three Dog Night, to come here. So aside from the Woodstock, music, sound, Harley Davidson's in the lobby. My gosh, it was unbelievable. We went downstairs, and then I'm interviewing my favorite group was Three Dog Night, and here's the lead singer. And I tell you, I was just on an incredible high. So the whole Woodstock scene was here for a CLE, and though we've done over 30 of them over time, that's by far the one which the bar was so high we couldn't read. We tried, and we could spend the next 5 hours talking about a variety of people we've had here and the number of interesting people we've had here, but that was beyond belief.
For those people who have maybe watched other parts of this interview or gotten to know you over time in the community, this is, again, exemplary of the style in which you managed to put things together and then expand them, push them to the limits, Greg, in ways that no one could ever have imagined. That's just another one of those. There's been a lot of them over the course of time that we have talked about the Robert H. Jackson Center. That's just another one that kind of falls into that same area of your particular expertise.
And for those watching, if you want to have the ultimate prize, we had a wooden statue of a bullfrog, signed by Corey Wells, lead singer, Three Dog Night. We had a puller, and Carol Drake. Carol Drake has it. So if you stop by her house, she'll be glad to show you Jeremiah the bullfrog.
Carol Drake. Carol Drake has not been talked about much in the course of this set of programs, but she was an instrumental part of more than bullfrogs here at the Robert H. Jackson Center in terms of the office and the early years and how it all came to function.
No question. She was our Radar Riley, jack of all trades, and she kept Raleigh and other subsequent. She in and out up for many, many years, and to this day is there on the call. So, Carol Drake, thank you.
I want to be serious after Woodstock for a moment because there are a few things that I want to get through, Greg, and return to. One of them is the concept of Jamestown jurisprudence. You have mentioned Robert H. Jackson grew up in Jamestown, took most of what formal education he had right here in the city of Jamestown, and then went on to be a brilliant lawyer in a variety of positions in Washington, D.C., eventually elevated to the Supreme Court and the chief prosecutor for the United States at the Nuremberg war crimes trials. And there was something about his roots in Jamestown that stayed with him, that caused him to think about the law in certain ways. And I just want you to expand a little more or take us where you are in terms of that concept of Jamestown jurisprudence.
It's a concept which was, at least for me, it was the first time I'd heard it was at 1996, frankly, at the statute dedication. There was a luncheon at Moonbrook, and among the speakers was his son, William Jackson. William Jackson, who was managing partner of a very large law firm in New York City at the time. He represented Nelson Rockefeller, Jackie Onassis. I mean, he was high end. But he came here and was very moved when he spoke about his dad. And he mentioned the concept of Jamestown jurisprudence, a term which had been used by some of the justices in commenting on the style of Jackson's writing, his pragmatic approach. He couldn't necessarily telegraph where he was going to come down on a particular issue. He was neither a liberal nor a conservative. Pragmatic, which was a term somebody else used later on, was probably apt. In those early days, Jamestown jurisprudence was the term they used, where kind of the country lawyer, a person who'd been in the town courts, been in the village courts, the city courts, Supreme Court, worked his way up through, but always, and on various sides of issues. That's how he practiced, and that's how he came down on decisions, and that's how he wrote. He wrote logically and for the layperson to read and understand.
Well, and that's exactly where I was going to go next with this, in that I'm a layperson. I have no more legal training than being at the Jackson Center many times over the last 20 years, and that's about it. And yet, when I look at the brief or even the lengthy writings of Robert H. Jackson, you get a lot of, oh yeah, and he seems to be able to synthesize things and clarify them to the point where those of us who don't have much legal education can certainly understand the concepts and the direction from which he came. I also have just enough experience to know that not all legal writing, not much legal writing, maybe there's some other legal writing that is like that, but he seems to be extremely distinctive in that regard. Was it his mind, his birth, his education, Jamestown, or what that led to that seemingly very unique talent?
It's probably not easily described, and I say that because several biographers have attempted to gather and to start books, but never concluding books. You know, they're in the history of legal jurisprudence. because he couldn't be tagged and easily written about, the Douglases, the Frankfurters, the Hugo Blacks of the world, which there are many books on. Jackson, frankly, that's Gene Gerhardt's 1958 book, and there really hasn't been much in a book process. John Barrett, of course, has written much on the blogs. But so to try to put into words what it is that Jackson emulated is not always often the easiest thing to do. Hence you use terms like pragmatic, and hence you shortcut it, but Jamestown jurisprudence.
Well, and it can't be pigeonholed, you're saying.
Yeah.
It would depend on the case, the situation,
Correct.
the precedents and all of that, and he wrote from that perspective as opposed to anything else.
Right.
With that understanding, Greg, and you and I have discussed this, and I've discussed it with other people here at the Robert H. Jackson Center over time, it is a very dangerous thing to do to take a current case in front of the Supreme Court and say, well, if Jackson were here, this is what he would say. Mm-hmm. This is the side that he would be on. And as tempting as that is, to come here to the center that enshrines his work and his legacy and say, what would Jackson do with this? You have cautioned me, others have, that it's a kind of a risky business to do that. Understanding what you just said about Jamestown jurisprudence and the fact that Jackson last wrote in the 1950s, what is, for those of us in the United States who are dealing with the same laws and some of the same concepts and some of the same challenges, what's the right way for us to regard Jackson's work and his thought process to make it so that we respect Jamestown jurisprudence and we don't try to pigeonhole him into a conversation or a case that happened 50-plus years after his death?
I think that's part of the beauty of this place here is we have taken time to drill into a few cases which Jackson was involved in. Sometimes Jackson either wrote about the case or, in fact, was behind the scenes, like in Brown versus Board, just to see how he adapted and wrote given those crises. So if you understand the fact pattern and you understand what it is, even the politics of the time or the content within which those facts were being developed, and then see how Jackson reacted, you might get a sense of what is practical and use words which he wrote in a fact pattern that might be similar today. So part of what we're doing is we better understand where we're coming from in order to understand where we're going to. So that's part of when we've done executive powers programs here, the Truman Steel seizure case, or the Korematsu case, where I talk about pragmatic. Jackson wrote an opinion directly against Roosevelt, or the executive powers, where Jackson wrote an opinion against the powers attempted to be exercised by Harry Truman, both of the same party, but clearly politics did not sway how he thought. And so we've learned from that, and that's important. And again, part of what we do as part of capturing that essence is by filming it. And part of it is we pull up all the time when events occur, hopefully gleaning information from either what Jackson may have written, or maybe what the clerks observed while Jackson was writing, to see how that may be applicable today. But it might be, in many senses, you're not going to wear a wristband that says, what would Jackson do? Because it could be a fool's errand.
So what I hear you saying, though, and let me know if this is the wrong way to encapsulate this, that maybe for those people who want to share in the legacy or capitalize on the work of Robert H. Jackson in the current arena or any other one, is to look at the process, to come to understand that pragmatism and how he applied it to the law, whether it's Korematsu or Youngstown Steel or Brown versus Board or any of the other many, many cases upon which he wrote opinions, to ferret out from that his approach to the law, that could become a more flexible, a more viable tool for people to take forward with them?
No question. You captured it well. And we at the center, and to the credit of the staff, we put up on Instagram and other social media outlets phrases, paragraphs, or sentences, and they do it a lot. I mean, now when I read them, sometimes for the first time, you'd say, wow, did he nail it, given the current circumstances, given the current questions? Because the questions that we have in 2021, frankly, are issues that are occurred in 1951, in 1851, when you put it all into context.
Well, sure. The issues are the same, the cases are not. So that's where you can get into trouble, I think, in attempting to say Jackson would fall with the conservative or the liberals on the court. And we all play that game today, even if we're not anywhere closely associated with the law or the Supreme Court at all. But we sort of play that weighing game. And I hope we're cautioning people not to do that, but to use some other part of Jackson's legacy. That's the United States, and I appreciate your taking some time to do that. Now, I'd like to take it a step beyond that, to the entire work at Nuremberg and what he established there in terms of international justice and crimes against humanity. What is the proper legacy for Robert H. Jackson for those who work in that arena today, Craig?
In one sense, you look at the source of international criminal law, and it's Nuremberg. And this time period, we're celebrating the 75th anniversary. And when you do that, you drill in and you see really the architect of the Nuremberg trial was Jackson, an individual. Now, there were many people who had ideas, don't get me wrong, but there had to be a quarterback. And it was a guy from Western New York, Jamestown, who actually was in the middle of making something out of whole cloth when, in fact, there had never, ever in the history been a trial against individuals who were the perpetrators of war and war crimes as defined, and crimes against peace, so on. It was Jackson. His negotiations in the London Agreement with the Allies, which then created a treaty, the London Agreement, which then in turn had to be, within a few months' time, pulling together the evidence, the defendants, the staffs, and in fact, all of that is a process. All of that is how to pull together evidence for a trial. A trial that, in fact, then is a criminal trial. Criminal trial. And to be able to pull that off and to present it, and it wasn't foolproof. They made mistakes. Jackson admitted they made mistakes. But you learn from that, and that trial ended with the first time ever of individuals being held accountable. And it's that legacy and the process which led to that legacy, and the evidence was presented and vetted, and how to have due process in an international criminal trial. I mean, that was never happened before. You had judges, or you actually not only had 4 judges with 4 alternates, but you also had defense counsel, you had cross-examination, you had access to all that. All the process is what's being used today in trials that have occurred most recently in Sierra Leone, Cambodia, Yugoslavia, Rwanda. That's all Jackson. So yes, there was law that was created in Nuremberg, and Jackson was the architect of that and is so honored of it, but it's found its way as best practices in trials that are occurring today, even in the International Criminal Court.
So concepts, then, are where it all started in terms of, or what we should regard as the first step in the Nuremberg legacy. The ideas that he developed in conjunction with others to lay the foundation for international law, and then a process that resulted from that. I'm saying that because it's a little different from what we said or you said about his domestic legacy in terms of his work on the Supreme Court, and that is really demonstrative of a certain pragmatism that would have been impossible because there was no foundation of law to start with at Nuremberg, so there was no pragmatic formula that one could follow. So in that sense, in that case, it is concepts and then the process that followed from that.
You should teach a course. You got it.
Well, the only reason I mention this is that for anyone who, and I don't know when anyone will watch this, if it's in 2021 when we record this, or 5 years later, or whenever, but there's a certain, may I say, volatility, excitement, challenge in international law today in terms of how those concepts can be applied and where you find crime, and is it just the despots of the world, or is it the powers of the world, United States, Soviet Union, Russia, China? I mean, who is capable of committing international crimes that would rise to the level of an international trial? And all of that is very unsettled business, I think.
Very fluid and certainly controversial. And that's going on now as we speak in the International Criminal Court, of which the United States is not a part. They've decided they're going to investigate Israel for alleged crimes in the Gaza Strip. Now, Israel's not even a party to of the ICC anyways, but nevertheless, the concept of law has found where they feel they have jurisdiction. So it's fluid, yet many concepts find their way back to the discussion of Nuremberg. It's remarkable. For anybody watching this, type in Google alert and just type in Nuremberg, and you will find on a daily basis articles all over the world which recite their perspective of the Nuremberg trial and Jackson. It's remarkable.
I would like to end this portion of our discussion by just highlighting one other thing, and that is in terms of the real occurrences and words that were spoken and the steps that were taken as they unfolded at Nuremberg. There may be no one who knows that better than Greg Peterson, because you have been involved for quite a little while now in a process in which you are dissecting all of that and recasting it. Tell us about your work.
I've used the term, and I think it's accurate. It's kind of audio archaeology. By way of backdrop, the trial itself, there was about 20 hours that was actually filmed, yet all of it was recorded on discs through a process which I've just learned about. It's remarkable. I won't get into it today, but nevertheless, it ended up in discs.
Like phonograph records?
Yeah, phonograph records, yes. And those, when the trial was done, boxes and boxes of those discs, nobody knew what to do with them, so they just went to the International Court of Justice at The Hague together with the film. Now, the film in 16 millimeter cans a few years ago was digitized by Steven Spielberg and the United States Holocaust Museum. Mm-hmm. Through a relationship I had with them. Again, mighty long story, but we got a copy, duplicate of that. And we at the center, through those 20 hours on the floor, and cataloged them, rearranged them so it was all in chronological order. It's been part of the center YouTube site for 12 years. Lots of activity. Recently, though, and this is what's really fun, in 2019, the audio, which were on the discs, they didn't know what to do with it. There was one set, one box. They didn't dare put a needle on it because they didn't know whether they'd destroy the disc. So they actually, through some laser technology, and I don't pretend to explain it, but through a company called Gecko, similar to the insurance company, or the representative of the insurance company, released the entire audio of those discs.
Extracted it and then made it digital?
Made it digital and put it in the International Court of Justice, the Holocaust Museum, and the Holocaust Museum in Paris. 3 spots. So I asked an intern who happened to be at the Jackson Center at the time I read this, I said, that's your job. Your job is to figure out where it is, and we should have it. We, the Jackson Center, should have it. Now, that was sort of pie-in-the-sky stuff, but tragically, that intern passed away. And a year later, Ed Tomasini looked in the computer, and there was some of it. He'd actually started to break the code,
Really?
and which was on. I mean, it's free, I mean, in a sense, but it was all in sort of 15-minute sound bites. 15-minute sound bites, and then a lot of crackle noise, and then another 15, and it had not been at all done with. So what we've done in the last, and I have enjoyed the passion of this, is gone in and edited, cataloged, dissected it for user friendliness. The Jackson opening statement, finding the 3 hours of it, putting it all together, so on the YouTube site you can just click it. If you wanted to listen to 3 hours, you could. Hear Jackson's actual words. Hermann Goering's actual testimony. Rudolf Hess, what his voice sounds like. Any of the prosecutors, any of the defendants. And I must tell you, we now have over 16 million hits on this project, which I are in the process of doing, slicing and dicing the words that were part of the Nuremberg trial so that it can be used in the, forever. But the Jackson Center is the first to take which is out there in raw form and put it together, edit out the noise factor, and make it available.
I just want to point out to anybody who's viewing this what it says about you in terms of and I'll use the word granular. Not sure I care for it, but this is a very gritty, technical, time-consuming, demanding process that you are involved with to fit all of this together in a way that would make any sense. Now, has it all been translated, or are you listening to other languages?
It's all in the original language, so Russian is Russian, German is German, French is French. How do I even know where I am? Says that's a fair question, because I have the transcript, which is all in English, and you can kind of sort of follow along to know where there's a cut or there may be an interruption or something. So you try to piece it together so it's fluid. Now, the next big step of the Jackson Center, hopefully through some collaboration, or maybe some donor will listen to this, because it'll be big money to cost, to take that German language that you're hearing from Goering and put on the film the closed caption of what he's saying. Now, we know it can be done because you see it on TV all the time. But I know that's a lot of money to do that. So anybody listening, this is your chance to get your name out with the Jackson Center. I welcome it.
I just want to mention, and again, part of the reason why I'm conducting this series of interviews with you is to get down for the record some of the activities that you have been very much involved with as a principal in the development and the continuation of this center. And you have talked about some of the extraordinary things that you have done here in getting Supreme Court Chief Justices here to the Robert H. Jackson Center, and you talked just earlier in this hour about the Herculean task of persuading people to name the federal courthouse, the new federal courthouse in Buffalo, for Robert H. Jackson. It's not all of that glorious, sexy work. I mean, there are other parts of this that are pretty demanding and pretty tedious that you seem equally as passionate about.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to say this, I'm a follow-up, follow-through person. My dad, I'm sure, instilled that in me, that once you have a concept, drive it to its logical conclusion. Now, not everyone, you have a goal and you think, I'm going to get there. Every once in a while, you may hit a brick wall and say, we got to abandon this. Not many so far through the Jackson Center. And I won't describe those one or two that have occurred. But
they're not done yet, probably, either.
No, yeah. We're still working on it. And I guess this is perhaps another thing my dad taught me, we all met these people who come up and say, you should do, or we should do, the community should do, and of course, they, as individuals, will not do it.
Right.
Somebody else will do it. But it's my idea.
Yeah.
Well, do it. Gather the troops. If you got a passion about it, lay out a plan. You don't personally have to do it all. And God knows, the Jackson Center, I get a lot of credit, but the reality, when you look at a program which we've done, and we laid out a bunch of names, hundreds of people have been involved in the center, continue to be involved in the center, that have their own passions to work along with the mission involved with advancing the legacy of Jackson. So, but yeah, I think based on, and there's some projects going on currently that, I'd like to finish before, I move on to something else at the Jackson Center, and we are in the process of doing that. And you try to energize a lot of people so that it makes your work light, but nevertheless, there's got to be that end game and quarterback and accountability of myself. If you start it, man, you better come to a logical piece, because people have relied on you along the way to get it into the end zone.
Well, and I appreciate what you say, and I'll use the word catalyst, because you have proven to be a catalyst for many things here at the Robert H. Jackson Center in particular. And throughout, as I have come to know you through the years and what I've learned through these interviews, it's always about the project, the goal. It's not about you, Greg Peterson, necessarily, but you manage to tap into people's enthusiasm for the goal that you see and get them to buy into it, to commit themselves to it, and then you very skillfully work along with that so that you do not become in the way and you do not become the project, and yet you are still very much a part of it.
Perhaps, yeah, and I think that's right. It's definitely not about me. I mean, this is a Jackson Center, and some other times it's things I've been involved in with the Resource Center, the Community Foundation, Village of Faulkner, Tarp Skunks, things that are really, that's the product. That's what people should know, and there are people behind it, and I hopefully that I've been some assistance in making all that a reality for the good of ultimately good of the community. It's the community of which you and I live in, Dennis, and you'd like to have people reflect on saying, great to live in the Jamestown area because we have certain things available.
Well, and there are lessons in leadership here, and that's one of the reasons why I was sort of dwelling on that point. And I will get back to the Tarp Skunks for a few minutes here, because we have a little left here today, in terms of how you demonstrated, again, the ability to put something together that might have seemed out of reach or simply impossible to others, and that is to build a baseball team with local ownership and control that will play, hopefully, for the first season ever. It looks like it as we talk here in March, in June, in Russell E. Dietrich Jr. Park in Jamestown. And I'd just like to have you recount that story from the perspective of the other things that you have done here at the Jackson Center in terms of seeing something that might be possible, but maybe people didn't believe that it could be achieved, and yet you somehow managed to make it happen.
Because time is short, without going into the background of a variety of history pieces, and you can read the book, Our Town, to see it all, but most recently with the Jamestown Community Baseball, when Jamestown lost its franchise in the New York Penn League because the rich baseball entertainment decided to move from Jamestown to Morgantown for very good reasons. I have nothing but the fondest respect for Bob and Mindy Rich. They've been great to the community. They were here for 19 years. By the way, they brought physically made available William Rehnquist to this center. So when they left, which left a void. And then there was a number of teams from a number of various leagues from independent baseball leagues to collegiate leagues, who wanted to use the stadium. It was the stadium was the draw in our long 75-plus year history of baseball here. Through a process of kind of showcasing a team in the Perfect Game Collegiate Baseball League came here. The ownership ultimately was in the name of ROC, R-O-C, owned by an individual named Mike Zimmerman, who was younger guy, but did very well in the medical insurance business, sold out, lots of money as a baseball fan, and he owned several franchises. Well, they won the championship, the Jammers did, in 2018. Won all the marbles, exciting, great fun. And then he decided for geographical reasons to have all of his franchises be in the Midwest, Indiana, Illinois, and Wisconsin. Well, you don't have to look at your Funkin' Wagnalls to see that Jamestown, New York is not in the Midwest. So he announced to the mayor that he was going to sell the franchise. Sorry, we won the championship, but I've made the decision. So the mayor called me and said, this is what they're going to do. What are you going to do, Greg? I said, what am I going to do? I'm not going to buy the franchise. I'm not going to do that. However, since you asked, why don't you ask him to give it to us? Give it to us.
He said those words.
Yeah, that's my words to the mayor. And he's going to feel guilty. He's a mega millionaire. He's a very nice guy, but a mega millionaire. And this isn't, big ticket for him. And he's going to feel guilty, so play the card. So Sam goes, really?
Sam Teresi,
I'm sorry. And so Sam had the relationship. And so a week later, the mayor called me and said, Greg, your wish is his command. If you create a community group, he'll give it to you.
So what would have been the price tag had you had to buy it?
I'm not going to tell you.
That much, huh?
Yeah. So all of a sudden, we wouldn't have done it. So all of a sudden, the mayor goes, good luck. You got it, Greg? And I go, okay. So I had no idea what the next thing to do. So using a model that had been done by a local hockey franchise, I called my good friend Chuck Hall, a name who was instrumental at the Jackson Center 20 years earlier through the Gebby Foundation, and asked him, how'd you do it? And they created a limited liability company, got 10 people to invest. And I said, okay, can you send me the stuff? So he dropped it all off. The LLC, the corporation, how they did it. And I started making calls. And I thought, gee, if we could get 10 people, that would be great. And we kept going after we got the 10th, 11th. And then if we got 20 of our local people to invest, that would be spectacular. Well, now we're at 32 or 3.
And this is not $100
No,
an investment?
It's not. And not. It's not. No, it's a good number. So
A number you're not going to say?
I'm not going to give it to you. They wouldn't want me to.
Okay.
Anyways, so we have 30-plus people in the community who've invested in Jamestown Community Baseball Limited Liability Company with the sole purpose of having a franchise in the Perfect Game Collegiate Baseball League. And proud to say that June 10th, 2021 will be the home opener at Dietrich Park, and we'll be playing a 24 home game schedule, and a whole lot of things are happening that I don't want to get ahead of the general manager, but stay tuned. But yeah, and let me just...
It is the 80th anniversary of the ballpark.
And
also.
it's the 80th, yeah, you got that scoop too. You're good, Dennis, man. Stay tuned. Against the team that we played.
Batavia Muck.
Yeah. That Russ, man, he's
Russ Dietrich, you're referring to, the man for whom the stadium is named.
and a man who deserves all the credit for even having baseball here. So baseball will come back, and I think what's critical for this model, and I hope somebody does see this, is it's a model of community leaders who are investing for not a return on their investment. They're not doing that. They're investing because they want to have this continuum of baseball, which now well over 80 years in the area of baseball. And I believe that if this model with all these owners and other contributors, some non-financial contributors also who've participated, if it doesn't work with this model, it frankly will never work in the Jamestown area. So I would hope that the community supports it. You're going to have a whole bunch of ambassadors out there who, because they have a stake, are going to be talking about it. And not too dissimilar to what we have here at the Jackson Center, because people who've invested over the last 20 years have a stake in it. They feel a piece of ownership. And hence, I would like to think that they'll be the model for the continuation of a couple of assets in our community, Jackson Center and baseball.
At that moment, I'll go back to that moment. Why don't you ask him to give it to you? Where did that come from? Did that just pop into your mind, or?
Yeah, the source of the good question. No. When it was a concept perhaps I developed many years ago when the Riches owned it, the Jammers. And I knew Bob and Mindy were thinking of moving on, and maybe the Jamestown franchise might be available, and they just simply say, hey, we're not going to have Major League Baseball in Buffalo. That was our goal, to have all these minor league teams stacked up, AAA, AA in Wichita, then Arkansas, and an A here in Jamestown. So they were lining all of that up with the idea that they were going to have Major League Baseball in Buffalo.
Mm-hmm. Hasn't happened as yet.
And not happened yet. They may have a team, they may have a game there this year. So as that progressed away and became more of a distant memory, I assumed that at some point Bob and Mindy would want to get rid of the franchise in Jamestown. Mm-hmm. Buffalo's their source. They would always keep that. So with that in mind, we developed the idea of them donating, at least I did, donating it if they ever were to get to that point, and they never did, but donating the franchise to the Community Foundation as a not-for-profit, tax-exempt organization, and they would take the franchise and then in turn create an LLC which would operate it with Russ and I and others to be involved. So that was not beyond the pale.
This was on the back burner.
Back burner.
For a while.
Then everything happened and they went to Morgantown and ancient history. So that just sort of, when that opportunity presented itself a couple of years ago with the conversation with the mayor, it did. That came off the real back burner, saying, ask for it.
Considering all what you have done here at the Jackson Center and the many examples of your approach to the work here and your leadership, Greg, and the Tarp Skunks and any other things we have not had the opportunity to get into this series of interviews, what's the next door that you're going to open? Is there one, as we speak here, in March of 2021 that you are looking at, preparing to dock on, a project you want to take on otherwise? No, I think right now, Tarp Skunks is a new fledgling organization, no different than the Jackson Center was 20 years ago. And once you get invested, you got to follow it to a logical conclusion. So I think energies will be there. With regards to the Jackson Center, there were a number of initiatives that are started, and now, frankly, now that I'm not on the board, I got more time to consider drawing a line through those. Back to the follow-up, follow-through, I would be hurting my own thought processes if I said, gee, I started this thing. A couple of historical marker projects, for example, one on Fairmount Avenue where Jackson's house is, Allegheny Assets. I've always wanted to have a historical sign and a wayfarer which talks about it. And so literally Friday, we're going to work that project. Hopefully, by the time somebody watches this in July, it'll be a reality.
That's one of those check marks. There's Spring Creek, Pennsylvania, where Jackson was born. We've got an archaeological dig there with the Mercyhurst. It's halfway through. I got to get that into the end zone to a logical end. I'm not sure what that is, but a logical end, maybe a book that goes with that project. So there are some projects at the center which were started or at least conceived, and I have a file on it. If I got a file on it, the odds are I got to deal with it by either saying, done, not going to deal with it, or conclude it. It's going to, one way or the other, I'm going to make a decision. So, yeah, there are a few of those hanging out there.
So from Greg Peterson's mom, film everything. From Greg Peterson's dad, finish everything. From Greg Peterson, reach for the stars. Don't let any barrier between you and your goal truly stand in your way, because if you're persistent long enough, the barrier will forget it's there, or you'll be able to find some way over it or around it. Is that the encapsulation of all of this?
Never thought about it, but yeah, that very rational. And yeah, I think you wake up in the morning thinking there's a reason to wake up and kind of move some ball along, whether it's the audio archaeology project, whether it's the Jamestown Tarp Skunks, whether it's other stuff that we've been involved in, but ultimately for the good of the community. I mean, these are not ego projects, because when the day is done, long forgotten is who might be behind that, unless you're doing a dig, an archaeology dig of this center, or an archaeological dig of other stuff. But you'll have the center, you'll have the ball team, you'll have the courthouse, you'll have something which hopefully will provide an asset to the community.
We should probably end on that note. As always, I'd like to express our appreciation and gratitude to Kristen McMahon, the president here at the Robert H. Jackson Center, and the staff for the opportunity to use the Kappa Theater to record these interviews, and for their support of this project. The technical work for these interviews done by Ed Tomasini, who has had a hand and a camera, if Greg didn't have it himself, in most everything that's been done here at the Jackson Center over the last 20 years. We speak to you on St. Patrick's Day, March 17th, 2021, in what we hope are the waning days of the COVID-19 pandemic, but we're still sitting quite a little ways apart just to make sure that we are observing appropriate protocols. Greg, thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. I appreciate all of this. All done. Thank you. So we'll take a next week off, and I'll get Cindy, because I think that's where.
I'm looking forward to it, yeah.
Yeah, she's worth it. We're hoping, what we're going to do, just so you know, I'm going to interview Lillian Ney.
Oh, good for you. What a grand person.
Oh, and I can't believe we honestly have forgotten. I mean, not forgotten, but it just hasn't hit the radar screen. So she's agreed to do it, and we'll do that right after Easter. Did I tell you that, Ed? Okay, yeah. We haven't got a date yet, but we just deferred it. And next. Tomorrow. Is it tomorrow?
You're talking about Michael?
Is it tomorrow? No, is it? Or is it the following week?
This,
Michael Hill, yeah.
yeah,
Okay, it could be.
you told me about that, yeah.
Yeah, she's talking about that. And so that'll be fun. I better check myself. Because Maureen hasn't sent you anything, has she?
Maybe I'm a week off.
Yeah, I think it's a week from. Yeah. Anyways, Michael Hill, and so I'm looking forward to that kind of what happens starting March 6th when you get your email and all of a sudden there's something called COVID floating around. You know, how did that year evolve?
Yeah.
Sort of like talking to Tom Reed, I guess.
Yeah.
You know, how did that day evolve? Because Lord knows that was the last thing on his mind when he woke up that morning before he read the email, that he'd lose a season. You know,
I'm sure.
into the board. How do you do that? That's really behind the curtain stuff. But he's willing to do it. There's enough history now. I mean,
Yeah. It's enough in the past.
yeah.
Well, Greg, I appreciate the opportunity. It's been a wonderful occasion for me to be able to sit here and talk to you about all these things. I appreciate being asked very much.
Well, you're nobody better than you.
That may not be true, but I appreciate being asked and
No.
try to follow the ball where it's bouncing.
Well, thank you. Yeah, thank you for doing it. I did, I don't know if maybe I told you, I did 6 hours of Stanlandine,
No, I didn't know that.
and that was terrific. So what I did was I